After giving him $130,000 over 15 years, he sued me for stealing his money, so I let my lawyer answer. On Christmas morning, while I basted the turkey and folded embroidered napkins, my son told his daughter I wasn't part of the family. The smell of cloves and citrus filled the kitchen as I leaned over the roasting pan, a faded cotton apron tied tight around my waist. I'd had that apron for over 20 years, the one with blue forget-me-nots stitched across the hem, a gift from Robert the last Christmas we ever spent together. The steam from the turkey fogged my glasses, and I smiled to myself as I basted the golden skin, watching the juice pool at the bottom. The glaze had caramelized just right this year. I whispered softly, "Perfect," though there was no one in the room to hear me. Outside, snow fell in steady flurries, blanketing the rose bushes I hadn't trimmed back in time. The soft hiss of heat blowing through the floor vent and Nat King Cole playing from the old stereo in the living room filled the silence. I looked at the clock. 10:30. They'd be here by noon. This was my 5th Christmas alone in this house, but not without company. Garrett and his family always came, Brooke, Lily, and Benji. But it was different from when Robert was alive. That year, I'd done more than usual. Started the pies 2 days ahead, polished the silverware until my wrists ached, and even replaced the worn runner in the hallway. I don't know why. Hope? Maybe. Habit, more likely. As I folded the last of the napkins into crisp triangles and slipped them under the holiday rings, shaped like miniature wreaths, my hand brushed the corner of the dining table. The oak was scarred with the history of our family. Dings from Robert's belt buckle, gouges from Garrett's science fair poster board, a stain where I once spilled wine after laughing too hard at a dumb joke. I'd covered the imperfections with a lace runner, but I still knew every mark by heart. The china sparkled. The good set, ivory with blue rims and silver trim, only came out twice a year. We'd received it as a wedding gift from Robert's parents, and I'd kept every piece intact for over 3 decades. I could still hear Robert's voice when he teased me for babying the plates. "You know, Ellie, one day Garrett'll just shove these in a box without even using bubble wrap." I'd laughed then. But he wasn't wrong. By the time the front doorbell rang, I'd straightened the silverware 4 times. I wiped my hands on my apron and glanced in the hallway mirror, tucking a few wisps of gray hair behind my ears. The red sweater I wore, Garrett had once said it made me look festive, now felt like a costume. But I smiled anyway and opened the door. Lily squealed and darted past me toward the Christmas tree, her purple boots leaving snow prints on the hardwood floor. Benji followed, clutching a wrapped box. Garrett came in next, tapping at his phone. He didn't look up. "Smells good, Mom," he said, thumbing a message as he walked through the foyer like a man entering a hotel lobby. Brooke appeared last. She wore a cream cashmere sweater and dark jeans that looked like they cost more than my first car. Her lips curled into something like a smile, but her eyes didn't meet mine. "Merry Christmas, Margaret," she said coolly, brushing snow from her sleeves without stepping forward. I gave her a slight nod. "You look lovely." "Thanks. I hope you didn't go overboard again this year." "No, just the usual. Turkey, ham, sweet potatoes, a few sides, some pies." "Mom," Garrett interrupted, finally looking up from his phone, "you don't have to cook so much. We're only here for the afternoon." "I know," I said softly, "but it's Christmas." I watched them settle in. The children were already shaking presents and peeking under boughs. I noticed Garrett scrolling again. Brooke took a seat on the sofa, legs crossed neatly, and sipped a bottle of designer water she'd brought in her purse. She didn't touch the cider I'd mulled that morning. We sat for dinner around 2. I lit the candles on the table, short white tapers in silver holders, and called everyone in. Benji groaned when asked to wash his hands. Lily skipped back into the room, cheeks flushed with excitement. The turkey was perfect, moist, golden, and fragrant. I had cooked the sweet potatoes just how Garrett liked them, mashed, not whipped. The green beans had toasted almonds, not walnuts, because Brooke was sensitive to tree nuts, or so she once claimed. I didn't even put marshmallows on the yams this year. Still, Brooke made a face. Lots of carbs, Margaret. They're vegetables mostly, I replied with a smile, though it faltered at the edges. Garrett said, "This is delicious, Mom, but in the same way you might compliment a motel breakfast. Polite, distant, somewhere between gratitude and obligation." I looked around the table as we ate. The sound of forks on porcelain filled the space. Benji asked if he could be excused before he'd finished. Brooke allowed it. Garrett didn't look up. After dinner, while they lounged in the living room sipping white wine from the fridge, Brooke didn't like reds, I returned to the kitchen to wash the dishes. The hum of conversation drifted in. I wasn't trying to listen. Truly, I wasn't. But the house is old and sound carries. "We should tell her," Brooke whispered. "After dessert," Garrett murmured. "She needs to know. We've already booked it." I stopped scrubbing. My fingers paused in soapy water. "Don't make a scene," Brooke added. "Just be clear." I dried my hands and composed myself. When I brought in the pumpkin pie, Garrett's favorite since he was a boy, he looked down quickly. Brooke avoided my eyes. We ate in strained silence. Then Garrett cleared his throat. "Mom, we need to talk to you about something." My fork hovered. "All right, what's wrong?" Brooke jumped in. "Nothing's wrong. We just wanted you to know about our spring break plans." I nodded slowly. "Sounds nice. Where are you thinking?" "We've already booked it," Garrett said. "A resort in Cabo, all-inclusive, pools for the kids, beachfront suites." "How wonderful," I replied. "When are you going?" "April 15th through the 22nd, Brooke said brightly. I waited for them to say something, anything. A request to watch the house, a mention of bringing me along. But Garrett just bit into his pie. Emma broke the silence. "Grandma, are you excited for our trip? Mommy says there's a kids club and everything." Brooke's face flushed. Garrett set down his fork. "Emma," Brooke said sharply, "Grandma isn't coming with us." "Why not?" Lily asked, still smiling. Garrett stood. "Emma, it's a family trip, just for our family." "But Grandma is family," Lily insisted. Garrett hesitated, then said it. "Emma, Grandma isn't part of our family in that way." The air left the room. Brooke tried to recover. "What your daddy means is that this trip is just for Mommy, Daddy, you, and Benji. Grandma has her own life." Own life. As if my life weren't built entirely around theirs. The house, the meals, the emergency rides, the Christmases they barely stayed through. My own life? I hadn't had one since Robert died. Emma's eyes welled up. "That's not fair." Brooke stood. "It's late, time to go." I stood beside the door as the children hugged me goodbye. Emma whispered, "But you're still my family, right?" I kissed her forehead. "Always, sweetheart." They left. The door closed behind them with a dull thud. I turned back into the living room. The wrapping paper still lay in colorful piles. Half-eaten pie sat on the table. The house was full of the remnants of a holiday for people who no longer saw me as anything but a convenience. I sat in Robert's old recliner and let the silence wash over me, like grief. They didn't want me there. I wasn't even an afterthought. I was nothing. That night, I sat at my dining room table, alone with cold pie and colder truths. The family I thought I'd built had made it clear. I was nothing but a relic in their holiday backdrop. On New Year's Eve, while fireworks lit up the sky, I lit up 15 years' worth of financial records, not to destroy them, but to finally see them clearly. I'd never been one to make a fuss over New Year's. Robert and I used to fall asleep before midnight most years, the television playing reruns of ball drops and countdowns we were too tired to watch. But this year, as the final hours of December slipped by, I found myself wide awake, perched on the edge of the old recliner in my home office, a blanket draped over my knees and a mug of lukewarm chamomile beside me. Outside, the bare branches of the maple trees shook in the winter wind, and someone a few houses down had already started setting off firecrackers, their pops echoing like small, angry reminders. I didn't turn on the television. I didn't put on music. Instead, I opened the bottom drawer of my file cabinet, the one I hadn't touched since before Brooke and Garrett's wedding. Inside were folders, labeled in my handwriting. A little shakier in the more recent years. Garrett, college. Home equity loan, 1. Jessica, wedding expenses. Emergency funds. I laid them out on the floor in front of me like pieces of a puzzle I was finally ready to put together. It started, as many things did, with a memory. Garrett standing in the kitchen in his early 20s, bright-eyed and full of ideas about a startup. He was always full of ideas back then. He needed $10,000 to show his investors that he had family support. I just bought this house and wasn't even finished unpacking, but I took out a second mortgage to help him. He called it an investment, not a loan. The company failed 8 months later. No return, no mention of repayment. And when I asked, gently, he waved it off. Mom, investments come with risk. You knew that. I didn't argue. That was my pattern. Don't make waves. Don't ask for what you need. Keep giving. Keep smiling. It's what mothers do, isn't it? I ran my finger along the edges of the receipts and statements, unfolding memory after memory. $15,000 for their honeymoon in Europe when Brooke's parents refused to pay for more than the wedding. $25,000 for a down payment on a starter home in a trendy part of town. That had come from another home equity loan. I remembered signing the paperwork at the bank, my chest tight, my hands trembling, not from fear, but from the silent knowledge that it would never be repaid. Then came Lily. Brooke didn't trust daycares, but she still wanted to work part-time at the art gallery. Garrett asked if I could help just for a few months. That turned into 2 years of unpaid childcare, 3 days a week. I canceled a trip to visit my cousin in Arizona because Lily had a fever and they had a dinner party. I remember rocking her to sleep in the same chair I was sitting in now. When Benji came along, the pattern continued. Help with groceries, help with car payments, co-signing a loan when Garrett's credit tanked. It's just temporary, Mom, he'd said. We'll make it up to you. You know we will. But they never did. The papers in front of me weren't just numbers. They were pieces of my life I'd given away, quietly and without condition, because I believed that's what love looked like. I told myself that again and again. Love is sacrifice. But sitting there with all that paper spread out in front of me, I realized what I'd never dared say before. Sacrifice, when unnoticed and unappreciated, becomes erasure. I added it all up, by hand with a pen and an old calculator that still made that satisfying clicking noise. The final tally was just over $130,000, and that didn't include the meals, the unpaid babysitting, or the gifts I bought every Christmas and birthday. The last firework of the night exploded just as the phone rang. I stared at the screen. Garrett. I almost let it go to voicemail, but some small part of me, curiosity maybe, answered. Hey, Mom, happy almost New Year. His voice was cheerful, casual, as if we hadn't just endured one of the most painful Christmases of my life, as if nothing had changed. Hello, Garrett. Listen, I hate to bother you, but we've got a situation. Jessica's car. Something's wrong with the transmission. Mechanic says it'll be about $4,000 to fix. We were hoping... He didn't finish. He didn't need to. You want me to pay for it, I said. Well, just lend us the money for now. We'll pay you back when I get my bonus in March. I looked down at the ledger in my lap, the rows of numbers, the years of silence and avoidance and manipulation. Garrett, I said carefully, when was the last time you paid me back for anything? There was a pause on the other end. What do you mean? I mean exactly what I said. When have you ever repaid me for any of the money I've given you over the years? He sounded defensive. Mom, you know things have been tight, and it's not like you need it, right? You've got the house, your pension. My pension is what I've been using to keep you and your family afloat. Mom, that's not fair. We never asked for all that. You offered to help. I closed my eyes, took a breath. Garrett, you called me on New Year's Eve. Not to wish me well, not to talk about Christmas, but to ask me for $4,000 while you're planning a vacation to Mexico. That's different. No, it's not. He tried again. Jessica's been really stressed. We just thought maybe you'd understand. I do understand, I said. I understand perfectly. So, can you transfer the money tomorrow? No. Silence. No, he repeated, like he hadn't heard the word before. No, I can't help you this time. Mom, why are you being like this? I'm taking care of myself now, Garrett. That's really selfish. The word hit like a slap, not because it was true, but because it was the reflexive defense of someone who had never once seen me as a person with needs of my own. I said nothing, just hung up the phone. He called back immediately. I let it ring. Then he texted, then a voicemail. The second voicemail was angrier. I don't know what's gotten into you. This isn't like you. Jessica's really upset. We thought we could count on you. I guess we were wrong. I listened to it twice. We thought we could count on you. Not we love you, not thank you for all you've done. Just disappointment that their bank account in human form had finally closed. I sat in the office for a long time after that. The house was quiet. Outside, someone shouted, "Happy New Year," into the cold air, but I didn't feel festive. I pulled out a notepad and wrote a new list, not of what I'd given them, but of what they'd given me. Birthday calls, once a year, sometimes late. Christmas cards picked by Brooke, signed with a flourish that never matched Garrett's handwriting. One time, Garrett had helped move a couch. That was it. 15 years of my life in service of a family that saw me only when they needed something. I picked up the phone, dialed Garrett. He answered immediately. Mom, thank you for calling back. I know this has been weird, but Garrett, I need to ask you something, and I want an honest answer. Oh, okay? Do you consider me part of your family? He laughed nervously. What kind of question is that? Of course you're family. Then why wasn't I invited to Mexico? A long pause. Mom, we've talked about this. It's just a nuclear family trip. Parents and kids. I see. And what kind of family am I? Your extended family, but you're important to us. You know that. Garrett, I said quietly, I raised you by myself. I supported your dreams, your marriage, your children, your lifestyle. I gave everything, and in return, I'm excluded. Again and again. Mom, don't be dramatic. I'm not finished. He fell silent. You've taken $130,000 from me over the past 15 years. You've never paid back $1. You've used my home, my time, my resources. And then you tell your daughter, I'm not part of your family. He didn't respond. I'm done, Garrett. Done being your ATM. Done pretending this is a relationship. If I didn't have money, if I couldn't help you financially, how often would you call me? He still didn't answer. That's what I thought. Mom, this is ridiculous. No, Garrett. What's ridiculous is that it took me this long to see it. I hung up before he could respond. For the first time in 15 years, I felt like I could breathe. The next morning, I pulled out the realtor's card I'd kept all these years. Her name was Maureen Kendall. It was time. While Garrett toasted margaritas in Cabo, I sold the house he'd always assumed would be his someday. It was early February, and the cold in Maple Glen had taken on that strange, bright stillness you only get in the weeks after the holidays. The neighborhood was quiet again. The wreaths had come down, the twinkling lights gone dark. A thin layer of frost glazed the sidewalks each morning. I'd stopped setting my alarm. The house felt too big all of a sudden. Maybe it always had, but it was the kind of too big you don't let yourself feel until you're ready to admit you've been living your life for other people. 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, and not a single soul to share them with, but the shadows of people who only ever came around when it suited them. I walked from room to room that Monday morning in slippers and silence, running my hand along the banister I'd refinished with Robert the year before he died. In the dining room, the lace runner still sat on the table from Christmas, undisturbed. I hadn't had the heart to put it away. It was easier to leave the decorations up and pretend it was still the season of family, even if the family had shown me exactly where I stood. I picked up the business card I'd left on the counter. Maureen Kendall. I remembered her vividly from 15 years ago when she'd helped me find this house. She wore sensible shoes and always smelled like lemon verbena. We'd hit it off right away because she didn't talk down to me. She respected women who asked questions. Robert liked that about her too. I dialed her number before I could talk myself out of it. Maureen Kendall Real Estate. This is Maureen. Hi, Maureen. I'm not sure if you'll remember me. Eleanor Whitmore. You sold me my house back in 2008. Eleanor. Her voice brightened instantly. Of course I remember. Maple Glen Colonial wraparound porch, right? That's the one. What can I do for you? I was wondering, would you be available to do a market analysis? There was a pause, followed by the familiar warmth of her professionalism. Are you thinking of downsizing? I'm exploring my options. I'd be happy to come by this afternoon. She arrived right on time, dressed in a long navy coat and snow boots. Her hair had gone fully gray since I last saw her, but her eyes were just as quick. She stepped through the doorway, taking in the scent of the lemon and cedar cleaner I'd used earlier that morning. You've taken wonderful care of this place, she said, her voice a mixture of admiration and surprise. I tried. She walked through each room slowly, tapping notes into her tablet. The hardwood floors I'd refinished 3 years ago. The kitchen I'd renovated with money I now realized I should have kept for myself. The garden that would bloom again come spring, even if I wouldn't be here to see it. Back in the kitchen, she pulled up comparable listings. This neighborhood's become highly desirable, Eleanor. Homes like yours? They're going quickly. I'd estimate we could list it between $680,000 and $720,000, possibly more with the right buyer. I blinked at the numbers. Are you sure? Absolutely. Yours is one of the better maintained homes I've seen this year. I sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd written checks for Garrett's emergencies, the same one where I'd fed my grandchildren cut up strawberries in little bowls, over $500,000, clear. It wasn't the number that startled me. It was what the number represented, a way out. Maureen watched me for a moment. You okay? Yes, I said slowly, just surprised. She packed up her tablet, told me to call her when I was ready, and left behind a small folder labeled Next Steps. That night, I opened my laptop and started looking at towns I'd never had the luxury to consider before. I wanted quiet, ocean air, something with a view if I could manage it. Somewhere Garrett and Brooke wouldn't just drive by and pop in. Somewhere I could walk down the street and not worry about running into people who only remembered me when they needed something. Seacliff, Oregon. I found it by accident, scrolling through listings. It wasn't large or flashy. It was a small coastal town with foggy mornings and clapboard cottages, the kind of place that smelled like sea salt and pine needles, where neighbors waved but didn't pry. I clicked through a listing that caught my eye. 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, a little garden patch out front, and a window over the kitchen sink that looked out onto the ocean. $485,000. I could buy it outright. No mortgage, no cosigner, no Garrett. I called the listing agent the next morning. I'd like to make an offer, I said. Would you like to schedule a viewing first? No, I'll take it sight unseen if the inspection comes back clean. There was a pause on the other end. That's unusual. I'm not a usual buyer. The offer was submitted within the hour. Meanwhile, Maureen listed the house that Thursday. I didn't tell Garrett. I didn't tell anyone. I cleaned and staged it myself, taking down all the photos of him and the kids, wrapping them in bubble wrap and tucking them away in boxes. I left up the neutral art, the watercolor barn, the framed poem, the bowl of plastic fruit on the kitchen island. I replaced the red towels in the bathroom with white ones. I opened the blinds wide and filled the house with the scent of cinnamon sticks and orange peel. We had our first showing Saturday morning. By Sunday night, Maureen called. "Eleanor," she said, her voice practically vibrating with energy. "We have 3 offers, all above asking. One of them is cash, no contingencies." I closed my eyes and swallowed. "How much?" $735,000. Close in 30 days. I gripped the phone tighter. "Take the cash offer. You don't want time to think about it." "I've been thinking about it for 15 years. I signed the paperwork the next day, while Garrett and Brooke sipped cocktails in Cabo and posted filtered pictures of beachside hammocks. I packed up my life in silence. I sold what I didn't want. I donated what I didn't need. I boxed up the rest, labeling it carefully. Dishes, books, guest room closet. I kept Robert's favorite flannel shirt and my wedding china. Everything else could go. The silence in the house became comforting instead of lonely. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for someone to walk through the door and ask for something. The phone rang less. The texts from Garrett slowed to nothing. I imagined their return, their keys in the lock, their faces when they realized the house was no longer theirs to presume upon. I didn't relish it, but I didn't dread it either. On the morning the inspection cleared for the Oregon cottage, I sat on my now bare living room floor with a hot cup of tea and listened to the sound of wind against the windows. I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. When I called the Oregon agent to confirm the closing date, she asked if I wanted to set up utilities in advance. I gave her my name and my new address, my name without Garrett's as an emergency contact, without anyone else listed, just mine. Later that day, I received a voicemail from Garrett. His voice was sunny. "Hey, Mom, just wanted to check in. We're having the best time. Jessica says the resort is incredible. The kids miss you, though. We'll swing by next weekend, okay? Maybe have dinner at your place. We can catch up." I listened to it once, then deleted it. 3 days later, Maureen handed me a check for $642,000 after fees and loan payouts. I stared at it for a long time, my fingers trembling slightly. This time, the future belongs to me. As their plane touched down in Philadelphia, Garrett had no idea he was homeless, and I was already gone. On the day they came looking for me, my name was already etched into a new mailbox 3,000 miles away. The morning mist rolled in thick over the coastal town of Seacliff, laying a soft gray veil over the water and the weathered rooftops. I stood barefoot in my new kitchen, the tile cool against my heels, my hands curled around a steaming mug of black coffee. Through the window, above the sink, I watched the waves roll in against the shoreline, the tide humming like a quiet prayer I hadn't known I needed. This kitchen was smaller than the one I had in Maple Glen, but it suited me better. Everything within arm's reach, no wasted space. The cabinets were painted a soft robin's egg blue, the oven preheated faster than my old one ever had. There was a warmth to this house that had nothing to do with the thermostat. The night I arrived, I had unpacked only the essentials: sheets for the bed, coffee for the morning, and a photo of Robert I'd kept in a simple frame since the day he passed. I set it on the windowsill, next to a tiny vase of wild daisies I'd picked up at the Saturday market in town. Robert never cared for daisies, said they looked too stubborn for a flower. I always liked them for that exact reason. The town of Seacliff was quieter than I expected, in the best way. There was a diner 2 blocks down where I could get eggs and toast for under $6, and the waitress, Carol, already knew my name by my second visit. At the general store, the owner called me Miss Ellie, like he'd known me for years, even though I'd only just arrived. The house had a screened porch and creaky floorboards, the good kind that remind you you're home. The bedroom caught the morning light just right, and every evening, I could hear the ocean whispering through the open windows as I fell asleep. I had made no announcement, no forwarding address filed with Garrett or Brooke. The only people who knew where I was were Maureen and the Oregon real estate agent. I hadn't disappeared. I'd simply moved out of reach. Back in Pennsylvania, they would have landed the night before, jet-lagged, sunburned, maybe even smug after a week of umbrella drinks and all-inclusive dinners. I imagined them walking up the driveway with their wheeled suitcases, Brooke tapping at her phone, Garrett jangling the keys in his pocket, only to find a for sale sign gone, the porch empty, the house cleaned out and quiet. I wondered if Garrett would try the front door first or the back, if Brooke would complain about the inconvenience before even understanding what had happened, if the children would ask why their toys were missing, their framed drawings no longer hanging in the hallway. That morning, I opened the mailbox out front and found a thin envelope from the county recorder's office. Inside was the final deed transfer, my name written clean and official on my new home. Margaret Eleanor Whitmore. No co-signers, no caveats. I ran my thumb over the embossed seal. Around noon, I sat down on the porch with a grilled cheese sandwich and a stack of old financial records, copies I'd brought with me, sorted and marked. Garrett's debts, my mortgage notes. The checks I'd written for cars, trips, insurance gaps. A quiet war chest of forgotten proof. It wasn't about revenge, not anymore. It was about clarity. I got a call around 2 in the afternoon. I let it ring, knowing exactly who it would be. It was Garrett, of course. I didn't answer the first 3 calls, or the 4th. But the 5th came with a voicemail, and I pressed play with a strange calmness in my chest. "Mom, what the hell? We just got back, and where's your stuff?" "The house is empty. The realtor says it's sold. Why didn't you tell us? Call me, now." I saved the message and turned off the ringer. The next call came from a different number. Brooke, I assumed. Another voicemail. "Margaret, this is unacceptable. The kids are confused. You left no note, no explanation. This is beyond irresponsible." I chuckled under my breath and turned my phone face down on the wicker table. The tide was coming in stronger now. Gulls cried in the distance. A man walked his dog past the porch, tipping his hat as he passed. I raised my hand in greeting. By early evening, the voicemails had grown more frantic. Garrett begged for an explanation. Brooke accused me of having a breakdown. At one point, she even said I had violated some imaginary family trust. I found that one particularly amusing, but it wasn't until the next morning that the real desperation began. "Mom, listen, there's some mail here addressed to you, a letter from the bank." Something about a frozen account. I think they sent it to the old address. You should probably, I don't know. Let us forward it? That was the one I'd been waiting for. I had, in fact, closed one of my accounts. The joint one Garrett didn't know he wasn't supposed to have access to. I'd set it up years ago, intended to help him pay a few bills during a rough patch. But I'd left his name on it, a careless act of trust that aged into a financial leash I hadn't even noticed was around my neck. Until I looked closer. I called the bank 2 weeks before the move, had the account frozen, then closed. Transferred the funds into a new solo account under my name in Oregon. Small balance, but enough to watch them panic when they realized they no longer had access. He called 5 more times that day. I answered none of them. By the end of the week, the tone shifted again. Garrett sent a long message. Apologetic, meandering, a little too polished. "I've been thinking, Mom. Maybe we haven't done a good job showing our appreciation. We miss you. The kids miss you. Can we come visit?" No mention of the house. No mention of the missing money. No mention of the 15 years of slow betrayal. Just sugar and suggestion, a mask stretched too tight to hide what lay beneath. I typed a single sentence in response. "I'm not available for visits at this time. No signature, no warmth." I didn't send it yet. I just let it sit in my drafts. A weapon with no need for use just yet. That evening, I walked down to the beach. The sky burned orange and coral over the water. Children ran through the sand, their coats flapping like sails. A couple in their 60s held hands as they collected driftwood. It smelled like salt and cedar. I had no intention of hiding forever, but I had every intention of making them wait. Back at home, I lit the fireplace and sat with Robert's flannel shirt draped over my lap. I hadn't cried once since leaving Maple Glen. Not when I signed the closing papers, not when I dropped the house keys in the envelope, not when the moving truck pulled away, but that night, as the logs crackled and the house whispered with unfamiliar comfort, I let the tears come. Not from grief, from release. The world hadn't ended when I left them. In fact, it had finally begun. They hadn't figured it out yet, but the real firestorm hadn't even started. Garrett's voice cracked when he finally asked the question he never thought he'd need to. Did you take the money? The wind along the Oregon coast had shifted again, bringing with it the scent of wet pine and salt. March arrived like an apology, soft skies, early blossoms, and a slower breath in my chest. I'd taken to walking every morning, past the rocky bluffs and clapboard homes, stopping sometimes at the cafe on the corner for a lemon scone and a quiet booth by the window. The waitress had learned my name. Her name was Clara. She didn't ask many questions, which I appreciated. I'd learned something unexpected about peace. It wasn't silent or grand. It was a string of unremarkable moments when no one demanded anything from you. But peace doesn't last when there are unfinished debts still crawling their way toward you. On the second Tuesday of March, an envelope arrived, thick, cream-colored, with Garrett's handwriting in frantic slants. No return address. I turned it over 3 times before opening it. Inside, 6 typed pages. A letter, half apology, half accusation. "Mom, I'm sorry for whatever I said or did to push you away," it began. "We're just worried. We came home and you were gone. No explanation, no forwarding address. Lily asks about you every day. We assumed something had happened. But then I went to the bank." I read slower. "And they said the account was closed. I called your financial advisor, but he wouldn't speak to me. I know you always said you handled things yourself, but I didn't think you'd shut me out." The next line struck like a cold slap. "Did you take the money, Mom?" As if it wasn't mine. As if he hadn't spent the better part of 2 decades draining it. I folded the letter slowly, set it on the table, and made myself a cup of tea. I knew what would come next. It didn't take long. A call, this time not from Garrett, but from a number in Philadelphia I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. "Mr. Whitmore, this is Alan Forrester from Whitman and Chase Financial Group. I represent Mr. Garrett Whitmore. He's expressed concerns regarding the joint account previously listed under both your names. He's under the impression there's been a miscommunication. If you'd be willing to speak..." I deleted the message before he could finish. 2 days later, the email arrived, this time from Jessica. Polite, polished, poisoned. "Margaret, I hope you're well. We were hoping to clarify a few matters related to the estate planning you and Garrett discussed last year. It seems there may have been some changes made to the trust structure, and we're not sure where things stand." She ended with a question. "Would you be willing to meet with our attorney to go over things?" My fingers hovered over the keyboard. No, I thought. I won't be going over anything. Not with the 2 of you. Not after the years you spent stripping me of self-worth under the guise of love. Instead, I picked up the file I'd assembled in January, the one with every document they never thought I'd collect. Power of attorney revoked. Joint accounts closed. Trust restructured. My will rewritten. There was one more document they didn't know about. A notarized affidavit from the day Robert passed, outlining the terms of our life insurance disbursement. He had left it to me exclusively, not the family, not Garrett, me. I'd kept that paper in a fireproof box for years. Garrett had always assumed it went to pay off his college debt. He even thanked me once, drunkenly at a barbecue, saying, "Dad's death bought me freedom." He was wrong. I'd paid for his freedom. That policy had stayed intact, untouched. I used it only to secure my own future. Now it served a new purpose. I emailed my own attorney, Barbara Klein, a woman with a crisp voice and a spine like rebar. "Barbara," I wrote, I've received a letter from my son implying financial misconduct on my part. I'd like to draft a formal statement clarifying the chain of events and protecting my assets from any false claims. Let's proceed." She called within the hour. "Smart move," she said. "Let's make sure they know where the lines are drawn." By the end of the week, she'd filed a statement of clarification with the state registrar and notified the banks of any potential dispute. I granted her temporary limited authority to respond to any inquiries on my behalf. If Garrett or Jessica wanted to escalate, they'd now have to go through a woman who once litigated 3 separate fraud cases against predatory adult children. I slept better that night than I had in weeks. Still, part of me, small, foolish, hoped Garrett would back off. But the next message changed everything. A certified letter. This one arrived mid-March, just after a light rain. I opened it on the porch, wrapped in a cardigan, the mug warm in my hands. "Dear Ms. Whitmore," it began, "our firm represents Garrett and Jessica Whitmore in a matter concerning the transfer and potential mismanagement of jointly held assets." I stopped reading. I didn't need to finish. I knew what it meant. They were trying to take legal action. I laughed, not a bitter laugh, but the kind that rises up out of disbelief. The same laugh you might give when a toddler throws a tantrum over candy they didn't pay for. They thought they could intimidate me. They thought wrong. That night, I opened my storage bin, the one marked private in thick black ink. Inside was my ledger, 15 years of receipts, checks, electronic transfers, annotated, dated, color-coded. I took photos of every page, scanned them, filed them into a digital folder labeled History They Forgot. Then I wrote my own letter. "Dear Garrett and Jessica," it began, "let me be perfectly clear. Every dollar you received from me was a gift, not a loan. There were no promissory notes, no conditions, no expectations, because I was your mother, and I believed helping you was the right thing to do. I attach the file of financial records. I am under no obligation to support you financially, legally, or emotionally. You are adults. You have made your choices. I am now making mine." I ended it with the words I never thought I'd write. "I do not wish to be contacted further. Any communication moving forward must go through my attorney, Barbara Klein. And finally, P.S. You didn't lose me. You threw me away. Now you'll have to live with that." I sent it certified. Signature required. 3 days later, Barbara called me, barely suppressing a grin in her voice. "Well," she said, "looks like they got the message. Their attorney just dropped the case. No further action will be taken. Something tells me you scared the hell out of them." "Good," I said, staring out the window at the sea. "They needed to be scared." Barbara paused. "You okay?" "Yes," I said, "for the first time in a long time. I think I am." The sun was setting over Seacliff, casting long shadows on the sand, gilding the porch in amber light. I breathed in the brine and pine, a scent I'd come to recognize as home. The game was over. But they didn't know I had one more card left to play. The only time I answered Garrett's call again, I let the silence speak longer than any words could. April rolled into Seacliff with soft rains and yellow tulips blooming in clusters along the walking paths. The ocean breeze had warmed, and the gulls grew bolder near the shore. I'd fallen into a rhythm. Coffee just after sunrise. A short walk to the corner cafe. Quiet evenings with a book by the fireplace. No one knocked uninvited, and no one asked what I used to be. I lived as myself, entirely. It had been 2 weeks since Barbara informed me the legal threat had been dropped. She advised me to maintain the boundary. I had. The letters stopped. The calls dwindled to a few every other day, then finally just one, left unanswered. I knew silence was its own kind of message, but part of me also knew the wound I'd left behind in Garrett's world was festering, and perhaps in some deep, unsettled way, that was necessary. But when the call came that morning from an unfamiliar Pennsylvania number, not Garrett's, not Jessica's, I hesitated. It was Lily. Her voice came in quiet. Careful waves. Grandma, it's me. Daddy's at work. I found your number in his phone. I sat down slowly in the wicker chair on my porch, heart stilled, breath caught. Hi, sweetheart, I said gently. You sound taller. She giggled, shy and soft. I think I am. I'm almost 10. The sound of her made the ocean hush. There was no anger in her, just curiosity. Where are you, Grandma? Mommy said you left because you were mad. I swallowed slowly, carefully. I left because it was time, I said. Not because of anger. Sometimes grown-ups stay in places too long, even when it hurts. I needed to go somewhere I could breathe again. Oh, she said. Daddy's been sad. He doesn't say it, but I can tell. I let the silence sit. I miss you, she added. My eyes welled despite my resolve. I miss you too, Lilybug, very much. I drew a picture of you and me eating strawberries on the porch, like we used to. Can I send it? I'd love that. She paused, then whispered like it was a secret. Can you send me your new address? Mommy doesn't know I'm calling. I gave it to her. And after we hung up, I sat there long after the call ended, the weight of a different grief settling into my chest. The grief of knowing that some ties can be salvaged, but only if you protect them from the ones who would use them as leverage. Lily's call lingered in my mind all week. Then on Friday, Garrett called. This time, I picked up. There was a beat of stunned silence on his end. Mom? Yes, I said simply. You answered. Yes. He exhaled, a sharp sound like he'd been holding his breath for weeks. Why now? Because I heard from Lily, and because there's nothing left for you to take, Garrett, which means I can finally talk to you without wondering what you'll try to get next. He said nothing for a long time. Then, I messed up. I know that. I let Jessica talk me into things. Don't blame Jessica, I interrupted. You are plenty entitled on your own. I didn't raise you to be cruel, but I did raise you to feel safe. And maybe I made the mistake of making you too comfortable. He was quiet again. I thought we were a family. We were. And I was the one keeping it stitched together, quietly, relentlessly, until it tore right through me. His voice cracked. Can I fix it? I leaned back, staring at the sky. Not like this. Not with apologies made over the phone when your real concern is how you'll explain it all to your friends. Now you want to fix it. Start with being a better father than you were a son. He didn't speak after that, and I didn't fill the space. After a while, I hung up. That night, I walked the beach, salt on my lips, the sky turning lilac over the Pacific. The past no longer walked beside me like a ghost. It had receded like the tide. In early May, a package arrived from Lily. Inside was her drawing. Me in a red sweater, her with braids, a bowl of strawberries between us on a sunny porch. She'd written in careful, slanted letters, I love you, Grandma. This is our porch. I will find it one day. I framed it and hung it in my hallway. Weeks passed. Then, on a warm June morning, while planting marigolds by the fence, I looked up and saw a silver rental sedan pull slowly into the gravel lot beside my cottage. I stood up, brushing dirt from my palms. The car door opened, and there she was, Lily, a little taller, her hair in braids, holding her father's hand. Garrett didn't look smug anymore, or defensive. He looked like someone carrying a heavy stone in his chest. He stepped forward, uncertain, but Lily let go of his hand and ran toward me. Grandma! I caught her in my arms, her laughter lighting the air like bells. Over her shoulder, Garrett stood still, not daring to move closer. I told him I wanted to see the porch, Lily whispered. I pulled back, nodded slowly, and looked up at my son. This was not forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning. The porch door creaked open behind me as I stepped aside. I have strawberries, I said quietly. And Garrett, for the first time in years, asked, May I come in? The door was open, but it would be on my terms, always from now on. There is a stillness now, not just in the air around me, but inside me too. A kind of silence I used to chase in the quietest corners of my old life, but never truly found until I chose myself. I sit here on the porch with a glass of sweet tea in hand and the sound of the ocean meeting the sand below, and I realize that peace was never something given. It was something I had to claim, and I claimed it not with shouting or revenge, but with stillness, with resolve, with the firm closing of a door I once held open far too long for those who never earned the invitation. They underestimated me, as so many do with women like me, older, quiet, giving. They mistook my silence for weakness, my patience for permission. Every time I said yes when I wanted to say no, every holiday I hosted, every check I wrote without being asked twice, I built a version of myself they grew to depend on, not out of love, but out of entitlement. And I allowed it until one day something cracked, not loudly, but like ice breaking underfoot, barely audible, but final. I look back now not in anger, but in clarity. My kindness was not a flaw. My generosity was not a mistake. What was broken was not me, but the way they came to expect my life to revolve around their wants. And when I finally said enough, when I moved silently and deliberately toward a life that honored my own breath, my own needs, they didn't understand. They panicked, not because they loved me, but because they lost access to what they thought was theirs. That truth still stings, but it no longer controls me. There was a time I would have bent over backwards to smooth things over, to make it easier for them to accept my absence, but not anymore. I have learned that dignity is not about being agreeable. It's about knowing your worth and refusing to debate it. I have walked through the fire of guilt, the echo of old expectations, the ache of silence from those I once called family. And on the other side, I have emerged whole. My son may never fully understand what he took for granted, and that's no longer my burden to carry. I gave him every chance to treat me like someone sacred. I mothered him with all I had, emotionally, financially, spiritually. I carried him long after my arms grew tired. But even mothers have limits. Even women like me, who cook and clean and keep the memories alive, deserve a life of our own making. And so I made one. I planted new roots, not in soil fertilized by guilt or obligation, but in earth that asked nothing of me but to be present. I found joy again in the sound of the tide, in the smile of a neighbor, in the simple act of waking up in a space that is entirely mine. I've traded the weight of being needed for the grace of being free, and that freedom is more delicious than any approval I once chased. I do not hate my son. I do not curse his name, but I will not carry his selfishness forward with me. He will have to reckon with the man he chose to become. And if one day he finds the courage to become something better, then maybe there will be space at this table, but it will be earned, not assumed. And to my sweet Lily, she is the thread I allowed to remain, the soft thread of love untainted by greed. I saw in her eyes the girl I once was, hopeful, kind, full of questions. If I can give her anything now, it's not money or inheritance or toys. It's the example of a woman who refused to be erased, a woman who stood up quietly and said no more. I hope she remembers me not as the grandmother who baked cookies or sent birthday cards, but as the woman who walked away when it mattered most, who said yes to herself in a world that always asked her to say yes to others. If you've listened this far and something in your heart stirred, if you've ever felt small in your own home, invisible in your own story, then let this be your sign. You are allowed to take up space. You are allowed to walk away. You are allowed to reclaim your name, your time, your future. Because the truth is, no one will protect your peace the way you can. No one will respect your boundaries unless you build them brick by quiet brick. My life is simpler now. I tend to my garden. I drink my coffee hot. I watch the sky turn violet in the evening, and I smile more than I cry. That, to me, is a victory. What remains, after all the noise, all the loss, all the clarity, is this one truth. If you take my kindness for weakness, you have misunderstood the strength it takes to be kind in the first place. If this story moved you, even in a small way, I invite you to gently tap the like button. It means more than you know. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, of quiet strength, hard-won justice, and the dignity of those too often overlooked, please subscribe to our channel. We'll be here, sharing what matters. Thank you for sitting with me, for listening, for remembering. I'll be here watching the tide roll in, always.